Hello, everybody. I'm Tim Blanks, and I'm here today to talk to Charles Jeffrey and Merrick Stiles, who have been blowing my tiny mind in the green room with an instrument they've created, which I think is, for the likes of me, just a whole new world that is so enthralling and disturbing and inspiring, and makes me feel like I've lived my life the wrong way. But I'm really curious, first of all, Charles, we talk so often about music. In fact, it's just about all we talk about. And the obvious question for me is, and for everyone else, I suppose, is how music has informed your fashion process over the years.
So I think before I started kind of creating fashion, I obviously had a club night, and that was a huge part of, like, I guess, my inception into the industry. And when I was given the opportunity to do fashion shows, I was kind of always thinking, oh God, this is such an amazing opportunity. Like, I can create a whole stage, and I can create a whole kind of moment and a performance, and kind of articulate the clothing in a larger way. So I would use music as a tool to kind of imagine what I wanted to do for the show. So I would kind of walk from my tiny basement club night studio in Vogue Fabrics all the way to my apartment in Shoreditch, and just like listen to the music that I was hoping to use for the show, and just sort of imagine what I wanted the models to look like when they were walking down the runway, or how I wanted the performers that I was going to use to kind of like dance around them. And so it kind of was used as a sort of like synesthetic tool, I would say, like kind of helping me understand like what I wanted my final outcome to be. And then as I kind of developed my sort of like brand a little bit more, I really tried to anchor what we were doing from a product point of view, if it was gifting musicians or kind of aligning with our output with doing music videos. It sort of was starting to become a little bit more ingrained in my process. And then when I did a collection that was specifically inspired by music, Art of Noise, in 2021, instead of using my campaign budget to do a photo shoot, I decided to actually make an album for the first time, because I was just thinking in terms of like creative direction. You have so many ideas when you're developing a collection, and it's only for 15 minutes. And I kind of wanted to create something that then could be revisited by people again and again. So the opportunity to actually create a piece of music and an album that had like the same arc as I would imagine with a fashion show was just such a great opportunity for me. And I got to work with people like Tom First, who is from the horrors and is own multidisciplinary artist now. And I actually got to articulate all of the images that I'd brought together for a collection, and some of the kind of music that I was also listening to, and then brought in another artist called Robert Fox, who's primarily a video artist but uses a lot of spoken word. And we created this album called Neko, and we used the music to create music videos that then were used for marketing campaigns that then we would do for our collection on e-commerce. And just sort of seeing these kind of lateral sort of ways in which music can inspire fashion sort of brought me to this place now where I'm at with Abbey Road and the collection there.
Can you think of other designers who have such an umbilical connection with music? Have you noticed your peers, or just in the history of fashion? Can you think of anyone who has been so involved in music in such a fundamental way while they're working on clothing designs?
I mean, it's really interesting. Like, I always like to kind of like zoom in on designers when they're sort of talking about music, just to sort of see if there's like a similarity. Like, I remember I was listening to a conversation with Jonathan Anderson, and I think it was that podcast with that guy that's in LA, and he's got like a mustache, and he kind of it's like a sort of desert island discs, but a little bit more with a mojito. But he was talking about the fact that he was playing the oh my God, what's that show where it's got Jennifer Coolidge. What's that show? It's the film. White Lotus, the White Lotus theme song again and again, but he would just play it maniacally in the studio and just like piss off all of his team. And I was thinking that's kind of like an interesting theme tune to play. But I think for me, like Rei Kawakubo, you can just see all of the references go through her mind. With Comme des Garçons, you sort of see, obviously there's like references to Mapplethorpe in the way that she wears her leather jackets and those portraits, but then also, you know, like there's talking heads that come through and all of those kind of pattern clashes when she does the menswear. And then also, I guess it's quite interesting how she sort of like layers music or chooses not to have music within the show. Like it's almost like there's that kind of like deep respect for it, but then also like a repelling nature for it. Because I don't know, I think for me, it's like if you're a creative person, like any sort of art form can kind of inform what you want to do. And I think fashion, you're kind of, it's a luxury. You can kind of take inspiration from anywhere and transfer it into clothing if you are trained to think about fashion in a lateral way. So, and then I guess McQueen, obviously, you know, they had such a powerful soundtrack every time they did their show. And, you know, when you go to Spotify and see the playlist of McQueen shows, it's just like so hardcore. Who was the guy that worked with Galliano, the DJ? That
Jeremy
had, like,
Healy.
Jeremy Healy. I mean, like when you hear about them talking about like the music and like all those
But
different
I think it's
vignettes.
slightly, to me, that's slightly different because that is a DJ friend of the designer who, you know, who makes the soundtrack for them, obviously with their input or approval or whatever. But this feels slightly more profound in a way. I mean, I have always said that a good soundtrack can save a bad show, actually, because I've always responded as much in it, well, as almost as much to the music in a show, in an actual fashion show, as I have to the kind of hair, makeup, mise en scène, whatever. But what you're doing feels to me like a whole step beyond that. I mean, you're really like reaching the point where, you know, are you a musician or are you a designer?
Hello. I love I love that.
Just on the flip side to your original question, we were doing an interview with Nile Rodgers yesterday, and I had no idea about this, but he said to us that Chic were the first band to ever, and I think this has gone down on record, to ever list or name fashion designers as part of the lyrics in a song. Like no one had ever done that before. So, yeah, I just thought that was like an interesting kind of thread there of these two worlds. Where who was the first to do these things?
Okay, there was Gucci, blah 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 blah, Fiorucci. Who was that? What was that? That was
Halston.
Halston, Gucci, Fiorucci. That was Sister Sledge. Was that?
I can't remember what song it
Was
was.
that He's the Greatest Dancer? No.
Yeah, I think it is.
Was it? I mean, it was. Yeah. Was that before Chic, or was that the same time as?
I think it was during. Yeah.
During, yeah. And I'm pretty sure that in the kind of heyday of swinging London, that people got name checked. If I really throw my mind back, but yeah, but it's interesting because that was a sort of credibility thing, you know, like the fashion bestowed a kind of cool on those bands when they reeled off those knowing brand names. But this is something more umbilical, it feels to me.
I mean, for me, like it's just thinking about, I mean, my brand's been going for 10 years and we were primarily known at the beginning for this kind of club relationship. And I think it took me quite some time to try and push it into these different paradigms in order for people to not kind of keep writing like Charles Jeffrey, radical creative, like club kid kind of thing. And I was trying to push the boundaries of what a fashion show could be and make it a lot more performative. And I started to see myself completely like next to whoever I was getting to do the music for the show, like listening to every single kind of like second of it and thinking, okay, like this is where I want this fabric to come through and this is where I want this element to come through. And in working with Tom, like I started to make all of these amazing kind of creative directions where I was like, okay, like we had a show called Engine Room and we were working with Oliver Sim when he released his solo album and wanted to remix one of his tracks. And basically I was thinking about what that would sound like if it was processed through a news press and then suddenly turned into steam and then kind of like recalibrated into something that's like of matter. And, you know, just, I don't know, like I started to see myself wanting to create music. And then the show after that, I decided to make a song with Tom and then actually sing on top of it. And I just slowly started to kind of get that presence a bit more within the music. And then I decided to create a band called the OR, and you know we're performing tomorrow at South by Southwest, and it's quite interesting that it's happening just on the kind of eve of us doing our kind of pinnacle project with Abbey Road Studios, which is my next collection. It's in collaboration with Abbey Road. And I don't know, it's just kind of, I need to get these elements out alongside the fashion as well, like if it's performing the music and creating the music, because I just sort of see them in harmony, you know, and I think it kind of helps push the kind of context of the brand into a different paradigm, you know. It's music, it's fashion, it's makeup for me. Like those are my three that I've decided to choose as being the elements that sort of orbit each other. So, and it's also just really fun. Like it makes it fun because, you know, half the time when you're working on a business, you're kind of having to play all of these different roles. Like you're thinking about the cost of garments, you're thinking about like different territories, you're thinking about wholesale, you're in e-com meetings, finance meetings, branding meetings, marketing meetings. And then sometimes I'm kind of just sat there, I'm like, you know, I'll do some sketches and stuff, but then I'm like, I want to create other elements. And I don't know, like for the longest time I was in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be 35 this year. Maybe I'm too old to be in a band or to start making music. But then I watched the documentary.
Never too old. Never too old.
Never too old. This is like LCD Sound System as well, you know, like he started in his 30s and I was like, well, I want to start now. And it's just, I don't know, it's just performing fashion and performance as well. Like there's two elements to continue to push forward.
When you said fun, that knocked the nail on the head for me, because that session we did in Studio 2 last month it was just going back to me for what a session should be about. Like you're in a room with all these various possibilities and these instruments around. And it's like, what can we do here? What can we create here kind of from scratch and not being bound by anything? Yeah. We just kind of went for it, right? We went with the flow. And I think at one point you were underneath a piano and I was holding the strings open. And I think Sarah was underneath there with you and you were just screaming through the piano strings. And we got this crazy sound. And then I just heard you say, what is my job?
Do you feel that's quite punk in a way? That kind of anything's possible spirit.
Yeah, I mean that is punk, isn't it? I suppose it's about just making things from nothing, I suppose.
And I have been missing a punk spirit in everything. I mean, the world needs a punk spirit right now, and it feels to me like I actually thought of something when I asked you if you could think of anybody else. I thought of Stephen Sprouse.
Oh, yeah.
In the way that he brought music into his fashion so kind of in such a real way with his friends like Debbie Harry and the people who were engaged with him in his work. Mm-hmm. And it kind of fits. You could be, you know, here we are. A little bit Sprousey, you know?
I like being a wee bit Sprousey. But it's, for me as well, there's like, it's sort of a slight response as well to like, I guess, some of the kind of vulgar elements that are happening within fashion right now. Like the fashion industry is almost like eating itself in a way. Like you've got all of these different kind of creative directors that keep put in one house, turned away, and then moved into something else. And I think that idea of creativity and being sort of like an individual within the industry sort of feels quite at peril. Like you could just get dropped at the next second. And I think it's sort of been, for me, interesting, you know, having my own business and having my own lane. Like I kind of feel like I wanted to sort of indulge in the fact that if I did want to go off and make music or start a makeup brand, like I can, and I'm not having to answer to anybody. And I think it's important for me to kind of like show that, you know, as a creative director, you can be in your own show, you can perform, you can get in drag, you can wear heels, you can kind of scream through a piano. Because I think there's this weird kind of commodification of like a creative director where, you know, it's like you have to wear jeans and a white t-shirt, be straight acting and like, you know, be someone that's like an arbiter of taste rather than somebody that's actually like getting entrenched in your own clothing and wearing it and living it, you know. I think for me, it's like that's the place that I've always sort of been when I've moved to London. That's how I saw designers. You know, we're in this space where designers like Gareth Pugh kind of influenced a whole room of people on the club, on the dance floor. Like everyone just looked like Gareth Pugh creations, like wearing kind of protrusions and everything. And I don't know, it's just interesting to kind of be in another sort of space looking back at fashion, sort of seeing how it's operating and wanting to do something a little bit differently, you know.
Speaking of brands, what did Abbey Road mean to you before this all happened?
Well, the sort of story and how we've kind of got to the collaboration is I was invited to design the award for the Music Photography Awards for Abbey Road, which they do once a year, but you also do it all over the world, right? It's like different territories. And I wanted to, obviously go and have a tour of Abbey Road and understand like what the space actually looked like in person. And when we walked in there, my colleague and I were just like looking around in Studio One and just being like, we need to do something in here. Like it just feels so like it's such an amazing opportunity. And when I was creating the artwork for the award, I wanted to work in a way that was sort of like synesthetic. So I was having this musician called J.N.R. Williams play piano whilst I was painting in the Gatehouse, which is a smaller studio just on the left-hand side when you walk in. And I've never painted to somebody playing music live, because I was asking him, I was like, I just want you to like play chords as I'm kind of mark making. And I had a bigger trip than I'd had taking substances. Like whilst I was sort of painting, it was like so interesting. We kind of got into this like sixth dimension together, and the artwork, it was just really interesting like result. And we've used that as prints throughout the collection. But then when we were thinking about the research, I just want to learn so much about Abbey Road and what it stands for. So I met with my friend Jonah Freud, who has this place called Reference Point in 180 Strand. And it was me and you, weren't we? We were going through that one laptop that basically has the whole archive of Abbey Road on it. And we decided to research and come up with a sort of story. And we were kind of doing, you saw some of the sketches that I was doing. It was similar to how we were recording the sounds for the instrument, like just sort of thinking about a red thread. And we decided to look at Abbey Road in sort of three segments. So the first is that kind of pinnacle time in Abbey Road's history when like the scientist, the guy in the lab coat who was using all of this sort of like technical equipment suddenly became, I guess, like a casual contributor to artists like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and alike, this idea of like becoming someone that more of a casual nature that's contributing to the art form rather than being some sort of stuffy guy in a lab coat.
So sort of breaking the rules, that sort of era.
Yeah.
Sort of taking a piece of equipment and using it in ways it was never intentionally designed to be used. So,
Yeah.
And some certain people, I guess, freaking out, going, you can't do that. And they were like, well, we're doing it and it sounds cool. You've got to try these things. You've got to experiment, I suppose.
Yeah, and sort of thinking also about that timeline, so like thinking a lot about 50s tailoring, and then also thinking about how, this same idea, how can you apply that to like a fashion outcome? So thinking about, garment identities sort of mishmash together, or something that would maybe be worn in a more casual way that's coming from more of a sort of like uniform or more of a sort of formal approach. And then the second chapter that we were looking at was the idea of the simulacrum. So Abbey Road obviously has all of this amazing tech, like all of these amazing instruments that have been created over the years. And then when they became from analog to digital, that sort of simulacrum, and sort of seeing that there's like rooms where pianos were played where they were completely wet, like using the building in a really interesting way to create a certain sound, then that suddenly is like a digital plugin that people can then sort of use, and sort of democratizing Abbey Road as a space. Like, how does that look in a sort of visual language? So we were thinking about, elements of trompe l'oeil, like different fabrics that maybe represented different garment identities, and sort of using those in different ways. And the idea of like the architecture of Abbey Road, like all the different rooms together, like how does like a pattern piece sort of relate to the architecture of Abbey Road? And then the final chapter is this idea of like the kind of bedroom producers. So that idea of like, the Abbey Road democratizing its space and its instruments, to a whole new generation of people. How do people's spaces look? We were looking at a lot of kind of like Japanese bedroom photography, and thinking about that kind of like gorillas-esque sort of look, that kind of illustrative look, and thinking about these young people and what they're wearing, and dekuru, where they're kind of applying all of these sort of elements onto themselves, like how that's also kind of like digital plugins, and how they're kind of applying all of these things onto the screen. How can we mirror that from a kind of visual point of view? So it was really interesting sort of pinpointing it together, and then creating a collection that relates to the Loverboy customer as well. So,
Merrick, how long have you been at Abbey Road? How long have you been working there?
I stopped counting after a certain amount of years, but I think it's, 1998 is when I joined, yeah.
So was this a way for you to see it through new eyes, working with Charles?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it was really inspiring seeing how you saw the various assets, if you like, from Abbey Road, and kind of how they made you feel and how they made you want to be creative, which is a side of Abbey Road I hadn't seen before, someone looking at it from that point of view. So it was hugely inspiring to do that.
Was Sympathy for the Devil recorded at Abbey Road?
No, no. Why do you ask?
Because what always amazed me about the Godard film is the Stones and their friends are all in the front, looking like, tripping and sort of their glamorous bohemian / Moroccan outfits and all the carpets and everything, and everybody who is around them actually recording the music is in a collar and tie and a jacket and looking like total boffins. And this is a sort of image I've always had of Abbey Road a little bit, that the artists are here and then the people who, like George Martin, are these kind of, they almost look like businessmen in the background who are actually doing all the...
That's a common theme,
work.
I think, from that era, perhaps, because I guess you got that transition from, I don't know, like a serious classical recording engineer, if you like, with shirt and tie, all that sort of stuff, to I don't know. I mean, Abbey Road, rock and roll came to Abbey Road in the mid-50s, I guess, with like Cliff Richard and the Shadows, that sort of thing, and I think it was the classical brigade, if you like, who they didn't want anything to do with pop music. They thought it was maybe like a fad, like this guitar music won't last, So I think it was the younger engineers who were coming through the ranks who adapted what they'd learned from classical sessions and applied it to this amplified music. So it was kind of uncharted territory. And I guess these engineers were still expected to look the part of a professional recording engineer, if you like, whereas the bands they're working with were anything but that. And I think maybe it was like a long crossover period. I think it was Ken Scott, Beatles engineer, who was the first engineer to wear like a brightly coloured shirt. Like shock. It's like, what are you doing? It was a different time. Yeah.
When he was making Hunky Dory.
He
had to.
But it's interesting because when you're kind of in there and you're recording, I mean, I was there like last weekend for 3 days recording stuff for my band, and like you are spending a lot of time sort of like waiting and waiting for somebody to finish doing something, and then you're having multiple different conversations, so that the space has to be like a very relaxed sort of environment for you to be able to kind of think and dream and process stuff, because there is a lot of technicalities that go into being in there. But then, there's lots of really quick things that have to happen off the cuff. Like we were writing lyrics, and then I was having to do some sketches that relate to like something that we're hearing. And ultimately, like you want to be comfortable in that space, but then you also kind of want to be something that's sort of inspiring, something that's happening in the room. So I think that kind of idea of the Beatles sort of saying to these technicians, I don't want to see you in these white lab coats. I think that's really interesting, because they were like, we just want to chill, we want to like relax. And I think that's what's really nice about Abbey Road when they say like, are you coming to my house? Because it is like a house. It's something, it is casual and it's like high-low. It's like really casual place to kind of hang out and be creative. But then it's also like got this ultra refined element to it as well in terms of like recording and creation. So.
But your collection, is you're saying, it's sort of the 3 stages of Abbey Road in a way, like the three kind of profound changes that have happened. Is this? Do you think, Merrick? Do you think this is another one? There's somebody like Charles coming in like this, and really really extending the relationship between music and fashion. And
I mean, not only just from Abbey Road's point of view. I mean, I don't think. I can't think of another example. I mean, obviously, there's loads of examples of fashion and music, coming together and making like amazing, getting amazing outputs. But we've kind of gone more granular, and I don't think there's any example I can think of where fashion and music technology have come together to make music creation tools. Certainly not at Abbey Road, and I don't think anywhere else. So it does feel like another new chapter, if you like.
Do you need to explain that a little bit, what you've actually done? You've made something that other people will be able to use in their music, like a new instrument?
Yeah, so we've... Sarah and I, we who also works at Abbey Road, we went to Charles's workshop in Somerset House with our little portable recorders, and we just were capturing sounds. Anything that made a sound, we would record it. So whether that was like sewing machines or ironing or like paper.
Screaming through fabric
tubes, scissors cutting fabric. I mean, anything. Even the stairwells at the back of Somerset House, we could do like capture a sonic fingerprint of those, so that you can then add that stairwell sound to the instrument. So anything we could think of. It was kind of quite guerrilla style with these little portable recorders, which I loved as well. Sort of added a sort of edginess to it. These weren't pristine recordings, were they? It was literally like you making a noise, and I just shoved this thing there and just pick up the sound, and you hope for the best. It's not like a pristine studio recording, and that's part of the vibe.
But how is this different from the way people have been sampling sounds up to this point?
Well, I mean, people have been doing that since samplers existed. We can even go back to the Mellotron if you want, with just sounds being, you hold down a key and the sound gets triggered. What I'm saying, though, is like we're bringing these two worlds together, which has happened before, music and fashion, but we're doing it at a more granular level, whereas we're bringing it together to make music creation tools. So, for example, with the cutting of the fabric, we can edit that and manipulate that, and then we can pitch it, spread it out across a keyboard, and then you've got different iterations of this fabric cutting sound, or whatever it is, whether it's the sound of the steamer or something like that. And then on the flip side, you came to Abbey Road, and we spent a day capturing sound, triggering sounds at Abbey Road, so like the pianos, drums, bass guitar, guitars. So we sort of put those two elements together, Charles's world and Abbey Road world, put that together and turn it into a music-making instrument. I don't think anyone's ever done that before, and we've just listened to one of the first iterations backstage, and it's cool, it's fun. I mean...
It's so cool. I think it's interesting because it sort of like bridges the gap between like the idea of like, me kind of creating music with the band and then kind of being inspired by music in creating collections, and then like kind of actually using the collection itself to then create a tool that then you can use to create music. So it's almost like this interesting kind of bridging of the gap. And I think, when we went into this season, we were kind of thinking about it, because it does feel like a bit of a generic question, like, how does music inspire fashion and fashion inspire music? But then it's kind of the best question to ask in this, and we've used like this collection that we've been inspired by the kind of history of Abbey Road as one answer. We've got this piece of equipment that we've created, and then the final chapter is going to be the happening that we do on the 14th of June, which is where we have recording happening in Studio One, and we've got a band that Tom First, who's my collaborator, has sort of handpicked from different bands. So we've got like Toy, someone that plays in These New Puritans, someone that's plays in my band as well, and we're going to be doing these like 20-minute drops of like long form, kind of like Hawkwind, krautrock, like sort of experimental response. And we've had people from the band come in and actually see the collection as it's been finished, and sort of going to use that as inspiration to then what they're going to play. And Tom's going to orchestrate it. We'll have models coming in and doing some sort of like Fosse kind of crazy moves, and then we're going to be recording that. There'll be 2 drops of that, 2 different sets of looks will go out onto the into the space, and we'll be recording it. And then the second half of the day is we're bringing in kind of like different arbiters within fashion, whether they are stylists for musicians, different creative directors, different musicians as well, from like techno to alternative new wave to spoken word. And they'll be wearing the collection and then also doing little vignettes within that space that will be recorded. So we'll be having a vinyl of those recordings that will also be the result of that happening as well. So it's almost like an experiment. Like the art direction that we're doing with Jonah Freud and Reference Point is that we're actually looking at all of the documentation, the paperwork that Abbey Road would use for recording sessions. So like kind of like, all of the kind of experiments where it's like, okay, title, 50s orchestra, playing Handel, and like what instruments were used, what was the instruments placed within the room. Like we've got all of the documentation as reference for the art direction, for the collection, for the lookbook, for it all. So it's like a real kind of like honour of Abbey Road and how it's worked.
I was just going to say that Tim told me earlier on that he introduced you to Hawkwind. So when you just mentioned Hawkwind, we clocked each other.
The sound of Hawkwind, my God. I mean, they were happenings, and Ladbroke, what was it? What was the what's it called in Notting Hill? The church, the tabernacle. Thank you. and Hawkwind would have happenings there. But this sounds to me more like the exploding plastic inevitable, which is something that I would love to have seen with my own eyes. And also it points towards something which I think is very, very interesting in fashion and very necessary at the moment, that people are really keen on the idea of community. And I think community is this kind of antidote to what is going on in the world and what's going on in fashion. That the notion of building support systems across many different disciplines. So you've got everybody contributing, and this is what you're doing. And it feels to me like a very timely and necessary thing to be doing.
I think that's the first thing you said to me, wasn't it? It's like, when this instrument we make, I want it to be available for everyone to download, like for free, I want people to use it and be creative with it. So community kind of knocks the nail on the head, I think, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like when you're creating a brand, I mean, like obviously when it started, it was like a community of people like all clubbing together and making art and creating a space to sort of dance in and wear clothing in. And then it's kind of been traditionally like a fashion brand, even though we've had kind of, I guess, some unconventional shows from time to time, but it has been a business for the longest time. And I think for me, it's like, as a creative director, it's like, well, how can I keep bringing people into the brand in a way that's different than just thinking about product? Because, that's never been the journey for me. Like, I think some people are, they're tied to a luxury brand because of the quality of the product and because of what that product maybe means to them. But because we're quite young, we have to rely on other things. We're not like a legacy brand yet. We're not like an Hermes where people will go back because they want that particular item. For me, it's always been about like that kind of journey and that community. And like people that I've always looked up to and been inspired by, like the Warhols of this world, like thinking about like the grouping of people and the kind of scope of work being across multiple different facets. And for me, it's like this project with Abbey Road has allowed me to really dig a lot deeper into like that other element of Loverboy, which is music, and using it to bring people into the brand so that they can create within the brand. They can actually like contribute using elements that we've had, rather than just wearing a beanie and a piece of knitwear and taking a photo on Instagram. Like they can literally go onto the website, download the plugin, and create a song from the literal brand itself. So,
do you think that generosity of spirit is something that's kind of intrinsic to London? That especially in fashion, I just don't see it in other cities. I don't see the community the fashion community that you see here supporting. This is why so many young designers, I mean, they're dependent on that support, because otherwise it would be very hard for them to survive. But it does feel unique, and it is super inspiring. And I think I would love to think that we're going to see more of that. That it is the future, that independent thinking and independent designers and independent retailers and all this activity, this cultural activity that's happening around fashion, that uses fashion.
That's the fashion that I remember being inspired by when I first started thinking about getting involved in it. Like I was starting to get really interested around like 2006, 2007, 2008, and like London was that kind of like forefront of innovation. You had like Louise Wilson at St. Martin's like churning out designer after designer. You had like people like Gareth Pugh and Christopher Kane, and they were kind of creating their own kind of communities within the city. And unlucky for us, we had Brexit that completely dismantled our relationship with the rest of Europe and took away a lot of funding, like literally from a logistic level. Like there's loads of funding for younger brands that have been taken away. And, the BFC have done a really good job of like trying to keep introducing kind of grants for young businesses. But also, if you're not going to have the footfall of people coming to London, you're going to have to rely on being innovative and turning back in yourself and thinking about, well, how can I bring people here? So for me, I now show in Paris, and I wanted this project to be still keeping my foot in the door with London, so it's an opportunity for me to still kind of have that conversation in the place where my brand has come from, but then allow my business to still operate in ways that, that it needs to, where I'll do my showroom in Paris and things. But, if I could, I would show in London the whole time. I love being in Paris. It's great to be able to be there as a kind of career highlight. But, London there's so many places, where I'd want to do shows. And my relationship with Abbey Road is a really long-term one. Like eventually I'll do a fashion show in there, I'll do it and it'll be what it needs to be. But as you said, London is a very specific place for community. And I've been teaching, alongside my practice, and you sort of see these groups of people coming together to support each other, but there needs to be that other level that takes them to where we used to be with London. So I'm hoping that changes in the future. But you've just got to think about innovative ways of what you can do with what's available to you. So I think I'm hoping that this project sort of remind people that it's not just always about clothes and fashion shows, which are really costly. A brand can operate in these other paradigms in order to create a community.
And where do you want to take this idea, do you think, Merrick? Now you've tasted this little bit of kind of radical thinking here. Where do you figure it will go?
Yeah, it's really interesting because traditionally I've worked with music brands, and musicians and composers. I'm not saying you're not a musician, but so this is a new world for me in terms of collaboration. And I mean, the instrument we're going to release, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we actually captured over those couple of days. We've got thousands and thousands of sounds, so we can do more of them quite easily, or even just record more if we really want to put ourselves through it. But it just feels to me like it's a fresh take on something that's been around for a while, which is music sampling, but we're kind of adding a fresh take on it. I'm always inspired that anything that feels kind of new, like a new collaboration, a new way of bringing two worlds together. So I'd love to do more of it.
But this is driven by Charles. So would you see going forward, Charles as a designer, you might do it with an artist, for example. You might be able to create these, because art and music are another huge kind of connector.
I mean, we were talking earlier on about the radiophonic workshop, for example, and they were at the forefront of taking objects, if you like, and sampling them and turning them into an instrument in ways that no one had done before. So I'm not saying that from that point of view it's like massively changing the world, as it were, but I always love seeing how bringing different influences together and where that can take you. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I just love recording sounds, manipulating those sounds, and then letting other people use those sounds to make music with.
But you could totally just make this like another chapter in Abbey Road's history, where you sort of like have different artists come in like from different paradigms, and then you just release an instrument in relation to that. Like, if this is a testament to a creative process, like
you could make anybody into an instrument.
There we go.
Which is better than making them into a machine.
Yeah, I mean, without giving too much away, it's kind of what we're doing in the background. We are. There's something bubbling away. Yeah.
So, how long do we talk for here? I have no idea.
Who's in charge?
Do we just go on until...
We've got 5 minutes.
We're what?
5 minutes, apparently.
Oh. So, I have to think of 5 more minutes of chat.
Well, I mean, my relationship with Tim is that we basically just like send each other music, and I always try and think, if I found like a really, really obscure band, like I'll send it to Tim to try and see if he doesn't know the beat. He's already listened to the full album track, and then he'll send me like 5 other songs that are even more obscure.
But my songs are old songs.
Yeah, but they're always so like I feel like I've given you like a curveball, and then like you're like, oh well, how about this? And then you send me this, and I'm like, oh my god, when you sent me Hawkwind, like I remember walking home and listening to it, and like the goosebumps. It's just like so amazing. You sent me Mother Sky by Can, and I was just like, oh my god, what is this? It's amazing. And that's literally been one of the contributing factors to this collection. Like those 2 tracks that you sent me.
But my thing about somebody in your position is that you're able to kind of be an ambassador for a lot more stuff. I mean, the thing I've always loved about fashion, when people say to me, why do I work in fashion, is because you can bring so much more. You can bring so much more into fashion than you can bring into anything else. You can bring in music, art, movies, television. You can bring opera. You can bring in ballet. Where if you take one of those other things, you can't always drag everything under that umbrella. But in fashion, it's really easy to do. Not easy, but rewarding to do that. So it's wonderful to meet people in fashion who are so open to everything around them and are able to use, like, to hear the thing that this instrument you created, the Charles Jeffrey, all the funny little noises. I mean, it's what did we say it was? The sound of fashion is the fashion of sound or something.
Yeah, I think that's the way you phrased it. Yeah.
It's like a little buzzy little thing. But yeah, it's just endless, as endless as sampling. Fashion is as well. So
And it took, in terms of recording, it took me to new places as well. Because I remember, like, we were both down on the floor in Studio 2, and normally I'm up in the control room, sort of looking down or whatever. But you were down there with, I think you were playing with some drums. And I don't know how I ended up with. I ended up with two microphones in my hand.
You're swinging it.
And well, at one point I was swinging the
swinging
microphone
one.
around my head, and then you were that's it. You were hitting cymbals, and I had these two microphones in my hand, and I thought, what if I just, like, once you hit the cymbal, I'll go in with the two mics.
Oh my God, yeah. And then you had Sarah in the control room being like, that sounds amazing.
Just spread it across the speakers, like, oh my God, it sounds so cool. And it's like, I've never done that before. I've never been in a room with a musician, they're triggering an instrument, and I'm just like poking microphones all around the place, you know? It's not, recording's normally quite static. Like, you set the mics up and you just leave it, you know? You might move the instrument around the mics, but you don't normally grab the mics and start waving them around the instrument. And we got some pretty cool sounds out of that, I think.
Yeah.
And I would never have thought of doing that normally.
But then amazing, you do that, you're waving microphones around, you've got all these machines, basically. You're using quite high tech or low tech. But at the end, you make sounds that are very emotional, which I find, I mean, there's horror movie sounds in what you made. It's this disturbing stuff, and there's beautiful stuff, and you made the beautiful things with the strangest rubbing whatever, and I don't know, whispering into a, what is it? What did you do? You recorded the sound of Somerset House.
Yeah, you sort of sent a
through
pulse through one of the rooms, so it's like this
wall.
machine that goes like, and it goes in and captures like the echo of the room. So
Yeah.
then if you then play a piece of music through this one channel, it will then sound as if it's been played in that room. It's like insane.
It's like capturing a sonic fingerprint of the acoustics of a room. And that stairwell in the back of Somerset House is insane sounding.
And I mean, the thing for me is it's just such a great opportunity to play, you know, like, I mean, I'm not a trained musician, but I think it's that thing of someone saying like, oh, I can't draw, but like anyone can draw. And if anyone kind of puts some sort of emotion or context behind something, it kind of gives it meaning. And that's why I love the no wave movement so much. And that kind of, my favorite period is that kind of period of time in New York in like the late 70s, you know, early 80s, where there was all of that group of people just sort of like making work together in like a dilapidated city, you know. And that always has been really inspiring for me, because it's meant that, like, you know, my approach to playing an instrument, you know, I was playing this bass guitar that I've owned since I was like 11, but never actually learned how to play it. But then I've played it in Abbey Road, so like, you know, it means something, and it's kind of like, who cares? There's no rules. We ended up coming up with like an output, and I think for me, like, that's the thing with fashion. Like, I've never been good at pattern cutting. I've never been good at sewing, but I've found an approach to being able to make a business. And I think that's why I like going back and in teaching, because you see a lot of kids and they're like, oh, I have to have things done in a certain way, or, you know, because of, you know, social media, they'd have this compare and despair. And it's like, you have to just constantly dismantle that. You have to make mistakes, you have to play. And that London is a really, really great place for you to do that. And like some of these like amazing technical musicians, like, you know, they're just like the best pieces of music that they've done have been like just playing, you know, and that's what we did in Abbey Road. And you get that kind of feeling from it as well. Like when you're in those rooms, you sort of have that feeling of, you know, all of the walls have absorbed this energy and it's sort of transferred into you. And we were just having a laugh. And you know that a lot of people have made beautiful, emotional pieces of work, but then they've also had a laugh, you know, and they've just made pieces of music that then that energy's transferred back. So
now you've done this, so where do you, after this illumination and you're thrilled and you're just alive with all of this, how do you take that forward? How do you go on kind of generating this kind of surge of creativity that comes from doing something completely new? How do you preserve that sense, do you think?
well, the interesting thing about the way that we're capturing all of the content for it, we've done a documentary which will be coming out in September alongside the release of the instrument. So, we'll be able to see all of that and record it. And then from the art direction point of view of how we've captured all of the images and the actual garments themselves, like it's all recorded in like a kind of sort of scientific way. So it's almost like, okay, this experiment, what is the outcome? Like I'll have to write like a conclusion, like a scientist at the end, like this is my brief, this is the action, this is the conclusion. But then also with my own music, like, this summer I've got a couple of gigs lined up and we can't wait to start making stuff with the instrument. So I'll be continuing to put myself out there.
The instrument. Sinister. I mean, for me, I think we're going to get like this feedback loop, right? We made this instrument from these two worlds, and then people will start making music with that instrument, and then that music that's being created from that instrument will inspire other things, and it will just keep growing.
Yeah, and then and also kind of from like a fashion calendar, like we're releasing the collection to market in June as part of like wholesale, and we'll be like selling the collection, and then when it comes into stores in January, February, we're thinking of doing an event in Abbey Road where, we've released the instrument in September and we'll be asking all of these producers to create music. Then, the idea is that we want to bring all of these people that have made music with the instrument and then also kind of having the collection released into market. Like it's a great opportunity from a brand point of view to also market the collection that's in stores, but then also do an event to then celebrate that kind of like final chapter of well, not final, but, like a bit of a conclusion of this particular collection that we've done. And as I said, I've got a relationship now with Abbey Road that's long-term, and it's just like there's a few different kind of channels that I want to push Loverboy's creativity through. So there's the music projects that we do, so this is one that's in that part. As I said, there's makeup, which is a whole other journey, and then there's obviously fashion, which is these other ones. So we'll keep coming back.
Do you think of this Merrick, as at quite a primitive stage at the moment?
No, not primitive, no. I mean, you never know where technology is going to go and where it's going to take you. But no, I certainly don't think of it as primitive. I think of it as raw and kind of exciting.
Raw is a better word, yes. Raw is a better word.
But no, I mean, It
does sound like Charles is going to take over the world.
Well, of course. We would hope so.
Go on tour. Let's start there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then, wait, how will everybody hear the instrument then? How will they encounter the instrument?
Well, eventually we're going to upload it onto Charles's website, and we will.
So it'll be super easy.
Yeah, it will be super easy to download and experiment with, and can't
so
wait to hear what people are going to do.
Like the whole thing about everybody saw the Sex Pistols at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester. There weren't very many people, but everybody formed a band. Then everybody in this audience can go away and do something with the instrument and bring it back to you at some point.
I like
Seeing
that
they're the first people to hear about it. Ish.
The instrument. We should just call it that.
You heard it here first.
Thank you.